Hi, everyone, and welcome to another AEC-Tech Talk. These discussions are organized by AEC Plus Tech, a platform and community that keeps you updated with the latest and greatest technologies in the AEC space. Today, we are excited to have two experienced AEC technology leaders and BIM experts with us, and we are going to learn a lot from their experience using BIM in improving workflows. These events will be recorded and stored on our YouTube channel for future reference. If you have any questions for our panelists during the event, please don't hesitate to post them in the LinkedIn or YouTube chat box, and we will address them when we can. I'm going to briefly introduce our wonderful first speaker, Jeff, and we'll let him talk more about his work. Jeff is an accomplished digital leader with over 25 years of experience in the AEC industry, specializing in the interface between physical and digital infrastructure. His expertise spans digital delivery strategies, complex infrastructure projects, and custom digital applications such as Digital Twin and Metaverse implementations. Jeff is recognized for his thought leadership in smart city and infrastructure delivery, BIM to Digital Twin integration, integrated data environment, IDE, AI, ML, RPA intelligence and automation, and immersive experience technologies. Jeff, thanks so much for being with us today, and we look forward to hearing about your projects and your work.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that very introduction. And I know it sounds like a lot there to kind of consume in terms of covering a lot of different strokes there. But yeah, I mean, one of my jobs at AECOM is certainly to look at a lot of different elements where emerging technologies are not only impacting how we deliver our projects currently, but also, guiding clients and owners to those digital futures as well. So, there are fundamental kind of foundational elements that kind of touch a lot of those emerging technologies that you discussed in the introduction there. And I think today, is going to be a great conversation, hopefully, around some of those foundational elements, because from a strategic perspective, there are core things, from a digital transformation perspective that are enablers and catalysts for those downstream kind of opportunities and value propositions. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion today around those topics. So just a little bit of a background from my side, a little bit beyond that introduction there. Yeah, working at AECOM, it's a really, I'm really grateful all the time for the opportunity to interface with where the industry is going from a digital perspective. Again, from the grassroots of delivering some of the biggest infrastructure projects around the world to, now from a digital perspective, taking a lot of the expertise and applying them to owner level and kind of asset owner level conversations about and guiding them to those futures, and really kind of seeing a bit of a synergy of where planning and design starts in the early days of a digital journey, and mapping and kind of guiding that out to those long-term and life cycle kind of outcomes. So what I'm going to do is, I sit in the Canada region here in Toronto, AECOM, and I've got almost 25 years of experience, as mentioned, working on large, complex infrastructure projects, a lot of public transit, big international bridges. Many times those projects, as probably everyone on this call is aware of, is the complexity between stakeholders and the management of information between different phases, and those stakeholders becomes more complex as these projects get more challenging and more schedule pressed and risk oriented to some degree. So it's very important fundamental things that we're going to talk about here. So I thought I'd bring up a slide right now, if that's okay. Let's see if I can get this one right. And I've only got one slide. I don't typically like to kind of do big presentations or whatever, but hopefully it's a bit of a guide. I hope that gets this right here. You guys see that okay now?
Yes, yeah, you can see it.
You may want to full screen it. It's a tiny bit blurry.
Yeah, I'm in a PDF here, so I'll try and just zoom in here if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay, yeah. So just at a high level, without kind of going into too much, as we're talking about particular tools here, but AECOM for the last 3 years has been working closely with the team at VIM across a number of different innovation fronts, and I thought I'd just share one kind of slide at a very high level without giving too much in terms of where that roadmap is and some of those exciting ideas that make their way into projects and outcomes down the road. But I just wanted to have, and maybe this is kind of a catalyst for conversation here, Samuel, as we kind of get going. But some of the things from a design perspective, and AECOM, being in a great position, both from a multidisciplinary perspective of architects and engineers, really understanding the dynamics of multidisciplinary design and collaboration, and then of course, interfacing with other stakeholders in typical infrastructure projects, contractors who are demanding more kind of real-time information and faster submission schedules that are needing higher quality level of information and more traceability as those submissions are being entered. So, and then passing it through that whole loop, to the owner level, and then kind of back. So in these complex infrastructure projects, there's been a real focus, as they become more collaborative, and new contract frameworks like public-private partnerships, and the different methodologies for executing that type of collaboration from a contract perspective. It really becomes important to really drive faster collaboration loops, and what that means, and how we've used VIM in the past, and currently, is really being able to digest larger volumes of BIM geometry and data, and putting them through kind of faster engagement levels with stakeholders, and design reviews, and analysis on the quality of models, kind of bringing those back. So from an infrastructure delivery perspective, there's been a tremendous focus from a digital transformation perspective of improving the quality and efficiency of collaboration loops. And tools like VIM, which I think we're going to get into in terms of understanding some of the infrastructure of that, has been a great catalyst, as I mentioned, for really being able to transform our complex BIM and model environments, and the data that's associated and connected to those models into those collaboration loops, whether it's a quality control loop, or even getting into topics like bringing these data streams into more intelligent engines, and kind of from a creative and design perspective, being able to drive more maybe recommendations, or really from an intelligence perspective, being able to harness that information as well. And I know as well, one of the things VIM has really helped AECOM for sure is from a basic kind of reporting perspective. So the automation that's built into the platform that we've been leveraging, being able to transform and visualize BIM models and BIM information and data in a Power BI expression, certainly from an automation perspective, has brought a lot of efficiency and also creativity to that loop as well. So Samuel, I guess as an overall concept, is that something fundamentally as well VIM is focused, is that kind of collaboration loop concept?
Yeah, especially as we start looking at more like Power Apps, and just the sharing, the accessibility of the model. We're going from, you need to have a $5,000 computer with all the best graphic card, to you can open this on your laptop, and the boss that is afraid of opening Revit and deleting everything in accident, and just terrified by all the Revit buttons, can open it on a very simple device. Maybe it's worth taking a step back and doing a tiny little intro. We're not a household name yet, like Autodesk, so some people may be wondering, what the heck is VIM? What is this? What's this marvelous thing? So Do you mind if I take a couple minutes to kind of maybe
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
hint at
For
the
sure. Yeah.
points that
Yeah.
you've been touching?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, at our core, Vim stems from an obsession with extremely large building, its geometry, and all of its BIM data. So we weren't satisfied with the file format of, well, Revit as a universal shareable format, or AFC for the performance, or FBX for the lack of BIM data. So we developed our own file format called Vim. And then for many years, we were selling to software developers or big companies, and they could kind of do whatever they want with that instead of spending 5 years of research and development to get access to this ridiculous scale. And personally, I've worked a lot. I'm from the architecture world, BIM manager, BIM coordinator, but I've worked a lot in lighting, rendering, and actually VR and AR. And when it comes to VR, AR, well, your giant Revit model, you're going to spend an entire week making it more efficient, optimizing the geometry. It's the most boring job in the world. But if you're going to go into the metaverse, you need to do that. And so you spend a week, you go from 25 million to 5 or 10 million triangles, and it's boring as heck. And then guess what? There's a new Revit update, and you need to start all over again instead of working on clouds or crowds or something actually beautiful and interesting. So maybe I'll share my screen real quick and show a couple of things. Let me see here. Screen. So one of our latest thing that we've released a bit more, we've taken out of the closet, is the 3ds Max integration. So if you're going into Unity or Unreal, I've actually tried importing the same model from an FBX from Revit, and it took, I think, 3 hours and 15 minutes. So if I import this as a Vim file, it takes more like 20 seconds. And as you see, I can decide if I want to split it by model, category, materials, things like that. But most visualizers will choose material. So then it's quite easy to override. And actually, maybe I'll take even a step back and talk about our geometry optimization. So as part of the obsession that I've hinted at earlier, we have been doing a lot of where's my thing here? We've been really obsessed with optimizing the geometry of Revit. And where is my file? 1 second.
Sure, take your time.
Oops, can't find it. Desktop. Here we go. So this is the geometry you would get from an FBX exported from Revit. So it's kind of like the worst case scenario, to be honest. A straight pipe will have hundreds or thousands of triangles. And normally what you do is you optimize this bad geometry and you try to improve it. In our case, we completely ignore it and we just do our own geometry from scratch from Revit, which means you can normally get about a third to a half of the number of triangles. So that entire process I talked about is much more optimized. And then, you can actually move the model around in here. It's actually workable. And if you have some screws or something ridiculous, you can still go in here. So that's just our 3ds Max integration. But those benefits come, what we've really been doing over the last years is integrating all of that in Power BI. And this is what Jeff was referring to. And, Power BI is kind of a new concept, right? It's building intelligence, first off. It's also the star product of Microsoft, and it allows you to link data from a bit anywhere, whether it's your database, an Excel sheet, a CSV file, a website. So the limit is quite large. There's not really necessarily any limit. And what else about it, right? So it allows you to kind of marry unlimited amount of data. We're talking about like big data compared to Excel, for example. And then the biggest thing too is really sharing that data as a interactive online report. So instead of saying, open up this Revit file, this is something that can be shared with anyone. Oops, there we go. classic live demo problems. So this is something that can be shared with anyone and is interactive. You don't need to install Revit. You don't need a good computer. You just need to have access to the web. And unlike a PDF, it's something where you can click on it, you can start accessing it. And even we'll probably talk about it later with Power Apps. You can start writing back to the data instead of just consuming it in many different ways. So this is really a new world. I'd say it's a bit like the transition from AutoCAD to Revit. And, remember 10, 12 years ago, we're like, oh, why would I do Revit? Why would I do BIM, right? I can handle these lines. Everybody knows how to work with these lines. Why would I go from Excel to Power BI? Why do I even need this? And I guess the other thing about Power BI is that when you're kind of given the powers of a developer, right? You're kind of given the Autodesk power without having to learn how to code. You can, if you want a button, if you want something to be different, you just kind of drag and drop it, and then it goes into this interactive dashboard. So I'll take a step back here so that just we have a little bit of a context, and I'm sure I'll dive right more into more reports in a couple minutes.
Yeah, that was really great. I think that was a good idea, definitely, to kind of put some visual to that. But it's a perfect explanation, really, of that feedback loop element from a design perspective, architecture, engineering element. So, the ability to transform, again, complex, BIM model and kind of environments and data environments into Power BI dashboards and instantaneously, and being able to share them and collaborate and stakeholder kind of engage with those, creates a feedback loop that informs that process much earlier and much quicker in a process, right? And so, that's one of the fundamental kind of core from a creative process, from a design perspective, some of the transformational foundational elements. It really accelerates that and actually, provides a better quality experience in terms of a feedback loop as well. Thanks again, Samuel, for going through the geometry element. So being able to, walk through in a more beautiful experience into those models and interact with that data in a dashboard like that, that's not going to slow down your machine and break down, is really important in terms of those quality feedback loops. So that's a great example. Power BI is a great demonstration of enhancing and kind of doing loops better, right? And, that's our whole kind of, can I bring the screen back to get to the second point, I guess, and we can kind of build off that concept? Yeah. Sure. Okay, let me just grab that again. Right. And so kind of moving to the second overall point, again, these are just high level perspectives from AECOM and, how we've used tools and catalysts like VIM and everything that you just kind of saw from a brief demonstration perspective. And, kind of going back to, what I was mentioning earlier about really some of the challenges that we've seen in the industry, and why everyone certainly as kind of emerging technologies really kind of reframing our world right now. What happened before? What can we learn from in the past? Going back to BIM management, this topic in itself, we've seen kind of that evolve over 15 to 20 years now. And just looking at the wider kind of impact, I think there's a great opportunity to learn from that as we move into these different environments. But certainly one of the kind of core challenges we've always faced is the continued siloing of information, and also how that, the language of information and data. And, I think, one of the things that we've been able to leverage VIM for, and, Samuel can kind of also discuss this, is breaking down, our BIM environments and our models and that information into something that's, much more normalized, from a structured data perspective, and whether that's, interfacing with something like Power BI, or being able to, pipeline that into other Power Platform environments, or even beyond into the aspirations of owners, in particular around digital twins and those types of scenarios. So, I think, you know, another kind of high level perspective that I can bring here, and from a creative approach in industry, is, yeah, getting down to a data level that, you know, is more normalized and more open and more capable of, you know, being part of an architecture that scales and grows over time. And as new technologies, you know, come on, especially as, you know, generative AI and those types of ideas are impacting our environment, you know, having that pipeline in a sense clean and ready, you know, really starts to break down some of the typical gaps in the industry. So yeah, maybe Samuel, like addressing it from a, you know, what is the core of a VIM kind of architecture, you know, what's produced, and the capabilities of kind of closing a lot of those gaps across different stakeholders in a life cycle approach.
So yeah, I mean, the tricky thing about Power BI is that you can kind of do anything, right? As a company, though, saying you can do anything, use your imagination is not a death wish, but it's not the same thing as saying, okay, here, you know, here's an apple, you can eat it, it's ready. There's no grow your own fruit kind of mentality. So, but the reality is that there's both. So what we've done is we've really focused on BIM auditing and teaching people how to do BIM auditing. At the end of the day, it kind of goes back to that Revit idea, right? You don't just buy Revit and everybody's great at Revit. You buy Revit and you customize it for your exact needs. You kind of create your own workflow. It's almost more of a process than a product. So at the end of the day, people are not super excited about buying process. You can say, yeah, get Power BI and VIM, and you can create your own digital twin. And then they go, okay, we don't have any Power BI experts. How are we going to do this? So the aspect of doing the templates for BIM auditing and then still doing a lot of education is a big part of it. And much like Revit, at first there's going to be the people that are in the avant-garde that see the vision, say, hey, I'm going to have one or two people in our office learn Power BI and become champions and automate some of our processes. And we see why it's happening. Now, I think what's going to happen is that these Power BI dashboards, you know, I think we've kind of really opened the door to it, frankly, because of all of our work in the data model, which is the most, you know, Revit people are not data analysts. So we kind of did that work for them so that they could just do the BIM work. So I think what we're going to be seeing is we're going to be seeing really cool dashboards, really cool usages, people doing their own digital twin platform, people doing their own really interesting, you know, BIM auditing, maybe even experiences, note systems, harmonizing of data. Like, for example, one of the templates I'm working with is going to be trying to harmonize issues, but that whether that issue comes from ACC, you know, BIM Track or New Format Connect or Revitso or BIM Collab, that it just becomes an issue. I don't care if we have a 3D point, if we have a Revit ID, it just gets harmonized, normalized into an issue. And if you're a contractor and sometimes you're forced to work with, you know, Naviswork, and sometimes you're forced to work with another platform, at the end of the day, you just want to always be using the same dashboards. An issue is an issue, a clash is a clash. Here, we're always going to be showing the same dashboard no matter what platform we're forced to use. So it comes with that. And then it comes with that whole idea of, well, I've kind of become the software developer, even if I don't know software, because of that little investment in it. And I think people that understand the value of Power BI and BIM are the needy folks, the folks that are never satisfied, that want to push things. If you just go, okay, like I use ACC and it does everything for me and I don't need anything more. Well, you don't really need Power BI and VIM, right? You're happy with what you have. But if you're needy and you're never satisfied, this is where you get those godlike powers. You go, haha, I get that button. I'm going to make that button. I want that report. I'm going to make that report. I have all of the data. I can do whatever I want with it. My imagination is like very easily, or I look at, you know, I'm not going to name any software, but you look at a software and you go, I really wish it would do that. Well, you can just spend a day or two and do that exact thing. And then you never have to think about it ever again. You don't have to go beg in the Autodesk forum, like, give me a button, please. It's just on your own shoulders. So it's more responsibility, but a lot more power in that sense. And when it comes to digital twins, whether you're just showing the IoT, the asset management, or whatever, those are pretty simple things. I think what we're seeing is these large owners, for example, normally they'll have 5 or 10 forms that they fill for renovation, and it's filled by hand. There's always errors. And simple thing, right? The length of the baseboards. So that's something they would fill by hand, how many baseboard lengths, and then it's going to go to the contractor and they'll give you an estimate. There's always the same price for the baseboard length. Whereas in this case, if they use the same family, they know exactly which family, which parameter to look for, length, baseboard. It autofills the form. There's not really any room for human error in that process. If they click on the baseboards, they're going to see exactly where they are in 3D. And then the estimation form gets filled out automatically. And they're using like a particular code for that baseboard. It's all the families they've created. So it's really customizing it to their exact needs and requirements, way more than just a digital twin. It's because sometimes industries or enterprise have really weird workflows.
Absolutely.
And nobody's ever going to customize it for them. And this, like Autodesk is never going to do that, right? But with this, they finally can. And if they're needy and complicated and unsatisfied, well, they can finally attain all of those things.
I mean, that's such a good point, because it's great that we're going down this way. But because what we're seeing in the market in general is a level of maturity that's it's increasing in terms of understanding those customized needs and wants at an organizational level or a program level or a project level, and really wanting the needy to be able to do that. And so we're seeing that kind of elevate in the industry. I think it's just a natural part of the adoption curve in general. And we would always propose solutions and approaches that provided that modularity and that flexibility, and giving clients or projects that agile ability to transform and customize depending on the needs of the projects at the time. We've just seen so many examples, kind of getting into Power Apps and Power Automate, having initial governance and kind of those foundational tools have seen, next thing we're doing a change management Power Automate flow. And that's all because it's built on good, governed, and controlled and clean information flowing into that process. So we're seeing that a number of times on projects where you really innovation on the fly, more customized to each project's need, but you're kind of being able to bring it all that kind of ecosystem together to create those types of flows and automations.
There's 2 things you kind of hinted at, or maybe 3. There's kind of 2 parts that we can help with, or that BIM data is useful for, right? The first problem, we're still kind of in this problem with training and skills, etc., is validating the data. So I set 500 rules for my BIM management. You got to have this code. You got to put this thing on this Workset. And then you go, oh my God, how am I going to check that? And you're kind of like, often in Canada, often they don't teach Revit in university. So all the architects come in and they go, well, I studied for 6 years and I don't know how to use the software I have to use every day. And then some people are close to retirement. They go, there's no way I'm learning Revit. I'm going to make it all the way through without learning any of this. And so you end up with kind of a BIM disaster a little bit. What is the company going to do? Train you for 2 years when you arrive and pay for your training, and then you're going to leave? What's going on here, right? So as a BIM manager, as a BIM coordinator, you're kind of have to monitor this little bit of a kindergarten where you got 15 employees with different skill levels in your model making mistakes every day. And then what are you going to go in the work sets and the schedules every day? Be like, oh, your couch is in the levels work set. So these reports really help for that validation. And then, of course, it's still a big problem because you got to monitor this for, a 3-year or 5-year project, and it's hundreds, thousands of rules. So what we want is people to customize these reports, and they're already really good at checking work sets and parameter accuracy and stuff, but we want people to customize it so that it checks their exact requirements, right? The data validation, it basically automates your job as a BIM manager, as a BIM coordinator. And then after that is the exploitation. So we talked about for the digital twin, your data is good now. Your 50,000 elements have the right thing. What are you going to do with them? You're going to color code them. You're going to monitor them. And so that's one of the big things. And then I guess that goes into the second part. I'll share my screen here for a second. So that exploitation, you hinted at Power Apps and Power Automate. So let's clarify what that is for a second. So Power Apps is something where you could select an item in the model and say, this is due for inspection, or there's an RFI here, or I have a question about this, or, this failed the inspection, and it would just go on the list of things that failed inspection. The Power Automate thing is more like automating, reacting to the data. So let's say you have this model here and it gets updated every day or once a week or whatever, and you're just kind of keeping an eye on the number of warnings in the model, or like maybe here we see the architecture model has 1,600 warnings, or if we click on just the critical warnings, we see the architecture model has 646 warnings. So Power Automate can kind of react to things, whether it's IoT, like, hey, it's too hot in here. Hey, there's a security breach in here. In this case, it could say, hey, you've got over 500 critical warnings, and then send an email, send a Teams message, send a Slack message, whatever it needs to be to say, boop, 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 you got 500 critical warnings. You may want to check this out. So there's that aspect. And I guess if we go back and push a little bit more on the concept of digital twin, there's multiple people in the construction, right? The designers, the contractors, and then the owners. And the owners are a bit laggards when it comes to BIM understanding. They go, well, I'm paying for PDFs. I don't care how you get it built. Or they go like, just do the BIM, and I'm going to do the minimum bid contract. So do the BIM, and then I guess give me the model. But they're not saying like, it's not acceptable that you have any duct in a structural item. You need to have carbon data for every single item. You need to have warranty data for the items. You need to have this, and that. So I think that's really the most exciting part for me, because once the owner starts driving the BIM rules for their own purposes, or even more oh, yes, there's a question. Yes, it will be recorded for future rewatch. So when the owner starts saying these are the BIM rules, or when the country or when the world starts saying, for planet Earth, those are the BIM rules. You need to have these parameters. They need to be filled out properly. These are the acceptable ways of writing a fire rating, for example. And it makes more sense from a building portfolio thing, right? If you have 100 buildings, if you have 5,000 buildings, you want to go, which are my blue doors am I going to repaint? What fire rating do I have across my building? How many skylights do I have in all my buildings? If somebody did it as a generic model and another one did it as a window and another one did the skylight as a door, you can't do that. You need a standard from the end user. You need to start with the end in mind, rather than kind of letting hundreds of designers figure out their own standards. And then guess what? You got 100 buildings. None of them talk to each other. They're all using different materials. They're all using different doors. They're all using different parameters. It's not the same shared parameters. So from a building owner, the idea of using Power BI to manage, exploit, understand their data, prove the carbon, prove some things to the government or to the insurance company, or when they sell the building, they go, here, I've got a great BIM model. That's going to have a huge value, especially as we start demanding proof of carbon usage or IoT usage for electricity or water. So that to me is the most exciting part of the digital twin.
I'll plug the subcommittee that I sit on, the National Institute for Building Sciences, NIBS, who I think are preparing a documentation that is standardization of BIM to digital twin. So when you kind of talk about, where that's going in terms of standardization across the life cycle of these models, certainly we're talking about that BIM to digital twin kind of interface and standardizing, and, having the ability to audit and kind of manage information, like you said, across that whole needs in requirements of that whole, because I mean, as you definitely mentioned 6 or 7 different data needs that could potentially start filling in through, like, that's just going to keep expanding as these concepts grow. So and then the second point I wanted to, you also touched on was scalability here. I know, talking about programs, talking about portfolios, and the last point I had on my slide, which I won't bring up, but I'll just kind of talk through, was, really looking at the futures of cities and the future of communities and neighborhoods. And, being able to just organize and creatively plan and, become more predictive and less reactive to, fundamental things within. So as you kind of have these tools that kind of build up at the project level, rolling up and giving kind of different value propositions like we're talking about, it does roll up to eventually city kind of levels. And AECOM, is well known, in terms of guiding some of the, large kind of future city programs of around the world. And it's one of the things that we're thinking about is kind of the, what do designers do at the very beginning that can enable those, long term, we're even talking about AI cities and, AI city operational kind of systems and those types of things. So really kind of bridging the gap between what happens early, what happens, in those future outcomes. So scale is an important element to that for sure.
I think too, one thing that's exciting about top-down standards is right now, you have a project, it's an airport, the client has their own standard. You have another project, the client doesn't have a standard, you use your BIM office standard, or you're forced to use some other office's standard if you're not the lead, right? And so you got architectural office following 30, 40 different standards. Now, with the Power BI templates, it takes a bit of time to customize the template to say, hey, this looks for the exact standards, the naming convention, the Workset rules, the the parameters that are mandatory. It takes a bit of time to customize it. And then after that, you just pass it through the report and it says, here's all your non-compliant things. You got 80% compliance. This project over here from Johnny's only got 40% compliance. So what you can start doing is saying, okay, well, Johnny, don't talk to me until your model passes 80 or 100% compliance. There's no reason for me to even look at it because it's telling us you didn't follow the rules. So, come back in a couple of weeks. But if we're talking about an NBIMS or a national or international standard, well, we can take a month to make the perfect template that absolutely everyone can use forever. And now that checking is automated. I'm not saying we're not going to need BIM managers or BIM coordinators anymore, but we've just eliminated 80% of their work if we get to that top level. So I know it's going to be hard to reach NBIMS and Building Smart and all of those people writing standards or the UK government. But as people get more top-down standards, the amount of customization and work to automate this is much less than saying, I got to automate this for 30 projects and that project's going to last 1 year and this project's going to be 5 years. You're just doing it once perfectly. And then that's it, right? So that's really fascinating to me. And then you kind of hinted at AI. I know Power BI, once you validate it, once data is there, you can do AI with it. Frankly, I haven't touched it yet. We're still, focusing on education for learning Power BI, focusing on templates that people can use automatically. Then we're going to be focusing a lot on IFC and IDS and things like that. And then once all of the things we can think of are done, we'll go look into AI. But I'm very curious. Like, we got all the data there, so somebody can just start using it with AI if they want to, right?
I can definitely, I'll just kind of hint at an example of some innovation lab we've been doing kind of around this. And, kind of going back to your comment about decarbonization and kind of carbon data, kind of connecting it. So, being able to consume models and design as they're going through with materials and combining them with embodied carbon data from different data sources, and then being able to compare those designs against, what AECOM has done in the past in terms of carbon decarbonization efforts in assess and both benchmark and start to set recommendations. I mean, probably every organization who's in the design space is thinking about this, I'm sure. But, you know, there's a reality to the ability to consume model information and start to produce recommendation engines, you know, based on intelligence and those types of things. So, right, you know, that's just one area, in, you know, decarbonization in particular, but it's impacting really a lot of different design feedback loops across the board. So we've used definitely the VIM transformation process to support, you know, being able to visualize actually some of that decarbonization strategy within Power BI dashboard experience. Yeah.
Last week I met the owner of CarboLife, which is a plugin tool in Revit. So basically what it does is it does a little bit of it's an open source thing, so that's interesting. It does a little bit of a trying to associate your existing materials with a material in a database. And then if it got it wrong, you can manually change it, and it's got a user interface in Revit. It's quite user-friendly. And then allows you to export all of that as a CSV. So this is, you know, very rough user interface, and I didn't correct any of the materials. So there's a lot of stuff that's wrong in here. But I thought it was so fun just to kind of get it in there and show, okay, here's a carbon database. It's been associated with your Revit model. You just slip that in, and within 20 minutes, you've got your, you know, color-coded report that just shows you. Now, of course, here we're going to get some of the wrong data. Sometimes it says it's concrete, and it's obviously not concrete. But it just kind of is a proof is in the pudding kind of thing where that's the thing, right? Sometimes you say, what have you been trying, like, can you think of what you want to do with Power BI? You can connect to any data, and they go, I don't know. And then once you have a use case, it's just like, okay, here's the data, bloop, it's connected, color coded. You can see it however you want, mash it up however you want, and then share it with somebody that's never going to open Revit.
Yeah, that's a lot of creativity embedded in that. And like as designers, as I mentioned, that's kind of like just, you know, brings the whole thing together because we love the expression of design, and even it comes to data and visualization. So the more tools and automation we have around that, as, again, from a design perspective, you know, that just gives us great flexibility to storytell projects and storytell analysis in our own ways. Yeah.
So I have a question. You know, I've had the opportunity, like 2 years ago, my boss, I'm a Revit nerd, and 2 years ago, my boss was like, Sam, you need to become a Power BI expert. And I go, oh, no, I don't want to. And then, you know, it was actually great. I did it and it was fun, but not everybody's going to have like, you know, a year or 2 years to just do this almost full time. And there's the whole question of, much like 10 years ago with Revit, like there's the whole challenge of education, training, upskilling. We were hoping that people can do this in school, right? Like we actually have a program where they can use a lot of our software for free if it's educational purposes. But like, how are you finding it in your office? Do you just pick champions just like you did 10 years ago? People are coming in and they go, oh, I really want to do this. Or,
yeah, no, I think it's changed actually. I'm gonna be honest. I think, and I don't know if it's generational. I mean, yeah, it definitely is 10 years different in terms of the workforce these days. But I think Power BI, I mean, it's just such a normal tool these days. I mean, and they've, you know, from a democratization perspective, like the ability to pick up, as you mentioned, like, you know, complex data from BIM models and kind of, you know, very quickly, even limited skills, being able to customize, you know, to those needs, or even right out of the box, being able to convert that into reports. So I think if there's a tool out there that can be leveraged in the best way that's already kind of matured to a point on a general mainstream level, it would probably be Power BI, right? And so with that, it's just a general cultural industry change, and that's just becoming a normal tool. You know, really, it's widespread, so you don't have the champion in the office. Literally on project teams, you have 6 or 8 different individuals across different disciplines who are creating their own reports and kind of aggregating them to a kind of common storytelling environment across a project or a program. So it's, to me, you know, I think in general, the Microsoft kind of environment in general has matured across the board. But Power BI in particular, I think we're at a new level of kind of democratization here. So it's broken down a lot of those challenges. Now, there's always still going to be more for sure. But I think just from a cultural industry perspective, it's become normalized.
Right.
Yeah.
Nick?
I was going to say that was a great question about the educational aspect of it. We had an event last week, and the CIO of CBT architect Nirvash is probably with us today, was saying how like you spend X on purchasing a certain tool or solution, and then they're spending 5X on the educational part of it. Just looking into the solution and seeing like how everyone in the office can use it, how they can learn it. So that seems to be a burden, and it's great to know that, like Jeff explained, Power BI is not that complex for everyone in the office to get the help.
Yeah, it's a shift. I mean, I've seen that definitely over the last 2 years in particular. I think just Microsoft has been a big part of that, and having, tools that are able to kind of fit into Microsoft architecture obviously is really useful and kind of become a catalyst for that. But I think in the last 2 years, right across the board, Microsoft has been an enabler, and kind of like we're seeing a lot of innovation and democratization of digital transformation through that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And Samuel, I have a question for you. So you talked about this customized Power BI report. So can you share with us some examples of how your past or your current clients are using these reports for?
Yeah, so there's some of them that we try to kind of do the workflows before anybody asks, right? There's some things that are universal. I've written a fair share of BIM execution plans, and I kind of know what everybody wants in that sense. Well, not everybody, but the general things about it. So here's, for example, a parameter checking tool. So it shows you the parameter. It says this parameter here is 68% filled. And then when you click on it, you see which elements have it. So we see, for example, the poke through boxes don't have any value for it. You see the values that are being used. So you kind of wonder, why are we using WL and numbers? Is this WL an error, or is this normal? And it's really good for that. And we can say, show me all the parameters, show me all the ones that are partially filled, show me all the ones that are filled or empty. But the reality is there's going to be some parameters that are more important than others, right? There are going to be, these are the BOMA parameters for our project. These are the mandatory parameters for our project. So in this case, it would be as simple as making an Excel sheet of all the mandatory parameters, ideally a list of the shared GUIDs, plugging it in. And now you probably add a little checkbox in there, and you say like, or probably I would duplicate this and I say all parameters versus mandatory parameters. And then you're looking at only the 50 parameters you care about rather than 2,000 parameters of different level of importance. Another thing I'll be working on is how do we check in a standard manner Workset rules, right? So I don't necessarily want 100 different ways of letting the offices figure them out for themselves. I want to create a best practice way where we figure out a way to write those rules in an Excel sheet. So there's 2 ways I think of it right now. This Workset can only accept these categories, and maybe you can even go down to the actual family name or a parameter in the family. But I'm going to start with this Workset can only have these families, or is forbidden from having these types of categories, and vice versa. These categories or these families can only be on these approved Workset or are forbidden to go on these Worksets. So that's a little bit like of upcoming work. And then the idea is you plug in this Excel sheet or you update it, and then the report says, you got 30 families that are on the wrong Workset. This Workset, the doors and windows Workset has a level on it. The level is not on the levels Workset. Just shows you all of the errors, shows you the number of errors. You can also, a lot of people, will start thinking about grading stuff, saying you got 80% compliance, or we can actually handle, the data side can handle an almost unlimited amount of projects because the data model is very optimized for large data. So you could say we're going to merge all of our BIM projects in the office that are using the same standards, and then say, project 1 has 50 things on the wrong work set, project 2 has 0 things, project 3 has 300 things on the wrong work set, has this number of warnings, all of its parameters are not filled. So you kind of have a grading level that you can monitor. If you're like the BIM director, you can say, okay, well, Johnny's doing pretty bad with his BIM project health for some reason, and then Lucy or whatever is doing amazing, and kind of keep track at the super high level of all the projects together.
Yeah. From a compliance perspective, from our, we've used this, ISO 19650, which is a common now information management compliance process, and requirements are coming through on a lot of our projects now. So, we've definitely taken, some of the VIM foundation here to map that out to audit checks, almost informal before those go through the formal ISO 19650 requirements as we're passing off information. So yeah, that's an example of, from a health check and audit perspective, tying it into ISO standards is really important as well.
I'll be honest, I kind of hate ISOs. I haven't been keeping up with them. But it would make sense. When I said if you can just customize it to the
that's what it is. Yeah. If you know that standard, you do that. Yeah.
And it's the more you're going to have projects and you're checking the standards, the more it's going to make sense to customize these templates, and you're going to get your values worth in there. And then also kind of upcoming, we're going to be connecting to ACC. So right now we've got enterprise tool that can, automate the process of transforming these models, updating them and things like that. But with ACC is going to be even easier, where you just say this model or these 30 models go to this report. And then whenever the model gets updated, all of the reports get updated, meaning you look at a report and it's the latest at all times, basically. So pretty excited about what's coming for VIM in terms of our new website, new automation kind of capabilities.
Awesome.
Great, thank you so much. We have 5 more minutes, so we have about 60 people with us right now. So dear audience, please feel free to send your questions in the comment section. So with that, I'm gonna ask you my next question, Samuel and Jeff. So what are some of the key focus areas and goals of VIM in utilizing BIM data visualization? Oh, and then I was also going to ask you, what, now that you're sharing, you're sharing, okay, you'll stop sharing. If you can share your screen again, if you can show us like some of these new features that you're planning to add in your next update.
So the features are not, well, I guess
okay,
I can
you don't.
kind of show you more of a, actually, am I sharing my screen? There we go. Yeah. So I can show you a little bit of what's coming for VIM Enterprise. So I guess it's what's in pink. It's really the ACC integration. And actually this part here, the desktop application, we had 2 things before. We had the cloud, which just goes on the cloud and that's it. But sometimes people have very needy security requirements, right? So at that point, they need to go to enterprise, and that way they can put the server in whichever country, they can handle 100% of the server. And also we can support secret projects, whether it's military or whatever, where it doesn't touch the internet and there's just full-on security. Obviously, at that point, you're no longer on ACC. You're looking at local projects for Revit or local files for IFC. Yeah. So it's really that customization that's happening. And before we had the SDK tools kind of fill in that role, but the SDK tools are command line interface. That's not very friendly, right? You're writing like kind of code stuff. It's fine if you have 100 employees and you have a programmer, is going to be cake work for them. But we've got this whole amount of people in the middle where they can't use cloud because of the security requirements. They can't use SDK because they don't have the programming skills in-house. And they're in this kind of weird limbo in the middle. So with Enterprise, we've wrapped a really nice UI. Actually, I saw it today. It was like 3 times better than I expected in terms of functionality and look. And so we wrapped a really nice UI around those command line interfaces. And so with this, it gives you the power to create your own platform, right? Whether you're creating a service you're going to sell to others as a digital twin platform, or whether you're just creating your own reports and you've got 100 projects and you don't want to be spending your time manually exporting or going into programming mode, you just point to all of your projects and then you click a button or you schedule it. Or if it comes from ACC, it's just going to automatically update. And then this just goes into the database and it goes into the report. And, you can also connect to external data sources. And the other thing about the Microsoft, when you're going through the enterprise tool, is your links are authenticated, meaning if I send only Nick, Naz, and Jeff a link, only you can open it, and you need to log in through your Office credentials. So if the link goes out, it's still 100% secure, unless obviously they have your username and password. So the level of security and independence is just really nice. And also it's no longer needing any developer. It's just user-friendly where anybody in the office could kind of be responsible for it, basically. So those are some of the things that are going to really fill in that gap between, programmer, super user, and Mr., Mrs. everybody going on the cloud, and just kind of give a easy power user kind of integration.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So we have about 2 minutes. Thank you for this great, insightful conversation. Is there any final comments, Jeff or Samuel, that you want to add?
Have one other quick kind of comment, just adding on to your question, maybe Nick Naz, about what's the ambition in terms of visualizing kind of BIM information. Certainly from an analytics perspective and all the feedback loops I was describing, but certainly from a creative and design perspective, we look for beautiful experiences. And, certainly that's enhanced our Power BI reporting game for sure, because they're pretty ugly before. But, also maybe we can save it for another webinar, but love to dig into the geometry element and how BIM is also supporting transforming our models, not just the data, but the geometry into future gaming engine technologies, for example, and being able to digest this type of data in a whole futuristic way. So maybe we can save that for another webinar for sure.
Yeah, especially I'm kind of a little bit of a metaverse VR AR nerd, so the geometry is huge. In terms of closing comments and looking towards the future, I think really what I'm excited for is seeing what people are going to do with these. Right now, a lot of companies kind of keep this close to their heart, and I understand why, but it's going to start, leaking out. It's going to start going out, whether it's for public consultation or just saying, hey, look at all the cool stuff we're doing. Come work for us if you're doing cool Power BI stuff. I'm really curious to see what people are going to be doing for BIM. And then also the future is education, right? So if you want to arm your students with the skills of the future, and also these are really nice paying jobs, by the way,
Sure.
because much like Revit 10 years ago, a lot of people don't get it yet.
I keep telling my teenage son that. I keep telling him.
It's like, before it was like learn coding. Now it's like learn business intelligence for BIM. So if you're a teacher, if you're a student, reach out to us. We'll give you free access to the cloud services, which we have. Like if you go on the website, it's actually going to be kind of completely different next month. And finally, if you want to learn more, don't hesitate to go on our website, vimaec.com, and schedule a demo with me and our salespeople. It'll be our pleasure to introduce you to all of this crunchy, beautiful information from the building information modeling.
Thank you so much. I really, really enjoyed personally this conversation. Very insightful. I learned a lot. So this video will be recorded. Thanks again to you both wonderful speakers and our dear audience who were with us today. So hope to see you all soon and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, Nick Naz. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Sam.
Thanks.